and I'm happy and appreciate that many of you could join and could give a positive response to this first class, and perhaps to be the last class of 2020. And again, I thank you and do appreciate Reverend Adi Moya Ralte, Dean of SCEPTRE, and his team member for inviting me to engage myself in this online platform where number of participants maybe a little or more. I do not know exact member who are participating, for inviting me to engage myself with you. As I have already mentioned in my previous BCS all course class, though the subject is too vast, syllabus is too vast, which comprises of different sections beginning from meaning and scope of communication till the end, which will span up to the importance of communication in Christian ministry. But in spite of its lengthiness, with its extensive sequences, yet we are told and directed to finish or to cover this very long syllabus within a limited time, that is within 2 hours. Not sure how and in what way we are going to make it possible, but we'll try our level best. So as we are going to engage through this Zoom meeting or through this class, and we'll participate in very different ways, I have some requests. Number one is to be patient and to be responsible. And second one is to be active and attentive, because previous class, most of the attendees are missing in between of our class. So I request you to be little more active and to be little more attentive. And these are some of the requests I would like to make for all of us. Then to begin with, let me share some reminder. This is only my computer screen. Sorry. Okay. This is your syllabus. Only to remind you that we are going to follow this sequence, your syllabus, beginning from definition and scope of communication, and the next section will be model of communication, stimulus response model. All these things will be mentioned. Then third one will be type of communication. Then barrier to communication. We have a number of different types of barrier to communication. Then issues in communication, history of mass media, types of media, then function of media, then section 3, Christian communication practice and principles, biblical foundation, Christian principles of communication, and the last one is importance of communication in Christian ministry. So we'll be following this one. Now, the first one. Introduction. Before we come to the main part, I would like to begin with this introductory part. Importance and significance of communication. As I have mentioned on the screen, communication is a basic human activity. If it suddenly disappears, our whole way of life would scramble. And human is seen as communicating animal because human is the only animal that can express and has the power to express in words. Therefore, without communication, we cannot understand each other. We know everything about these things. In human beings, communication is essential for three basic reasons. Number one is to the development of the individual and to the formation, continued existence of group or community, and to the interrelation among the group. Then, apart from what have been mentioned, communication is a basic necessary for living. It enables human beings to enter into meaningful relation with other persons and exchange experience with them. Then the next one is communication is the fabric of human life. Communication is known as fabric of human life. If it is through communication that we become what we are, both in the corporal and spiritual life. Communication is also the way in which God makes himself known to human, and it cannot be denied that communication is a vital process which preserves the fabric of the society. In fact, let me say in this way, in fact, there can be no single word or sentence to express the importance of communication. It plays a very, very important role in all aspects of human life. As I have already mentioned, the WCC in its fourth assembly at Uppsala state that communication as a fabric of life. It is a fabric of life, which may means to say that it is by communication we become what we are. We become what we are, and this is also the reason why many people perceive communication as the lifeblood for human survival in the society. Sorry. It can also be seen as the air we breathe. It is also regarded, it is also known as the air we breathe. That means no communication means no life. So it is essential for moral, for physical and spiritual life, as well as for the growth and development of human. And it is, in fact, let me add a little more. It is, in fact, mentally, psychologically, socially, economically, environmentally, and politically, and anymore, culturally, emotionally, or spiritually. We are what we are because of communication. So communication is very, very important because it is the essential human connection. It is the ground of meeting and the foundation of community. Without it, no idea, no principle, hypothesis, belief, and faith which bind human societies in their various enterprises and activities will be established, projected, and promoted. So it is very, very important. So for the thought of the day, thought of the night, or thought of the day, you can see from your screen, if communication does not exist, there can be no salvation at all. If communication does not exist, there can be no Christian theology. There can be no Christian doctrine. So by seeing these two statements, you will know how important it is communication. It is very, very important. As I have already mentioned, there can be no single word or single sentence to express the importance of communication. Now, this is understanding. Yeah, understanding communication process. The first one is definition of the term communication. Here I have mentioned, do I need to explain all these things? No need to explain, isn't it? Or I will read two, or it is all right.
It's okay, sir. You can just go through it, no problem.
All right, yeah. Yeah, sometimes we'll skip some part, and sometimes we will read.
The syllabus is very vast.
Yeah. Yes, unless we skip a certain part, we may not be able to cover the entire syllabus.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
So, as mentioned here, the word communication is derived from the Latin root word communis, which means common, and from the word communicare, which means to share, to impart, or to have something in common. So this is how we understand communication: to share, to impart, to have something in common. But this is not only the explanation given by some scholar we will be seeing right after these sentences. So in everyday use of the term, communication means making common or sharing something by two or more persons or groups of persons. Yeah, even the Oxford English Dictionary also listed communication meaning. For example, the imparting, conveying, exchanging ideas, knowledge by means of speech, writing, or sign. Any attempt to define communication has therefore to reckon with the idea of mutually and commonness and exchange, a shared environment, a social relationship among the participants, and the existence of the common need. All these things are included. When we talk about communication, it is not only exchange of information from sender to receiver, but it is imparting, conveying, exchanging idea, knowledge. All these things are included. You will be seeing this one. So various scholars with their explanation. For example, Dennis McQuell explained communication as communication is a process which increases commonality. And he further described human communication as the sending from one person to another of meaningful message. This is the first explanation. Then another one for Cooley, communication is the mechanism by which all human relations exist and developed. Then Jürgen Roos, communication is the mechanism by which all human relations exist and develop. Is the process that links this continuous part of the living world to one another. And Frank, communication is a process by which sender and receivers of the message interact in a given social context. All right, we are very familiar all these things. But another explanation given by one of the communication scientists is communication does not refer to verbal, explicit, and intentional transmission of the message alone. The concept of communication would include all those processes by which people or something influence one another. So this is the meaning or the real essence of communication when talking about communication. This is about communication. Then there are three basic functions of communication. This is not included in your syllabus, but I want you to know about the basic functions of communication. Without knowing the basic function, we cannot go further. The first one is information. Second one is education, and another one is entertainment. There are so many things to discuss on this, but we don't have time. Now, we'll be moving to the next part, scope of communication. Scope of communication. When we talk about scope of communication, it means the normal functioning area of this subject. Since communication is essential in every sphere of human life, its scope is wide and pervasive. From cradle to grave, human beings are somehow engaged in communication. No one can pass even a day without communication. Therefore, in order to help us understand the scope of communication, we shall have little elaboration on the following point. Number one is communication in personal life. Communication in personal life means the reason why I mentioned this point is that communication is closely related with every sphere of human life, from dawn to sleep. At night, a person communicates with others. Person communicate with others. And this reveals that communication is the part and parcel of human life. Communication touches almost every part of our life. Almost every part of our life. Then second one is communication in social life. Communication is often recognized as a backbone of our society. It is recognized as the backbone of our society, and it is believed and said that it would be hard to construct a modern society without communication, without its involvement. Without communication, there can be no way of constructing a modern society. As we are on the verge of human civilization and live in an integrated society, communication helps us in creating and strengthening the social bondage and integrity. Then communication in state affairs. It is also important. Communication is also important even for state affairs. Communication is pervaded in all area of state affairs. As we all know, without communication, state neither can administer its various wings, nor can maintain relationship with the other part of the world. So we can say this: due to revolutionary change in communication technology, the whole world has turned into a global village. Then another point is communication in business. Communication is also important for business. We all know about these things. We cannot think of business without communication. Communication is the lifeblood of business. It is also the lifeblood of business, as it provides necessary information in formulating business plans and policies. And it also ensures effective performance of business activities like production, like distribution, finance, all these things. Therefore, ultimate success of the business depends on successful communication. Then another one is, next one is communication in management. There can be so many things to say about all these things, but if we go in a very detailed one, we may not have, we may not be able to cover the entire section. So we have to skip some part. Communication, international affairs, communication in religion. Moving to, this is the last. This is the last part. This is the last part. But before we move to the next section, from from the short discussion that we have already or mentioned here, we can draw the conclusion that the scope of communication is so wide and so vast that it encompasses, communication encompasses almost every sphere of our personal, our social, our national, our international, and even our religious life. That is what we can mention about the scope when we talk about the scope of communication. This is the first section. Now, moving to the next part, that is model, different model of communication. We will not go in a very detailed way this section, but some part we have to see. We have to have a few discussion on some part. For example, before we move to the different models of communication, we need to discuss what is model, what are the function of model, and what are the advantage and limitation of model. All right, what is model? Model is simply a pictorial description of peace or reality. It shows the main elements of any structure or process and tends to describe the relationship between them. Model helps us to organize and explain and predict the outcome of the event through their image and representation. So communication can be defined in a number of ways and therefore can be explained through a number of models. For example, Mortensen explained in the broadest sense, a model is a systematic representation of an object or event in idealized and abstract form. Then another one, communication models are merely picture. They are merely picture, and they are even distorting pictures because they stop or freeze an essentially dynamic, interactive or transactive process into a state picture. And another simple explanation we still have is models are only a metaphor. They are only a metaphor. They allow us to see one thing in terms of another. So these are a simple explanation that we can give right now. But in addition, communication models are systematic representation of the process which helps in understanding how communication works can be done. So models show the process metaphorically and in symbol. Model shows the process in symbols and metaphorically. They form general perspective on communication by breaking communication from complex to simple and keep the component in order. So communication models can sometimes encourage traditional thinking and stereotyping, but can also omit some major aspect of human communication. Then moving to the next section, function of model. According to Deutsch, there are 4 distinct functions of model as mentioned here. The first one is known as the organizing function. And this is seen in its ability to order and relate dates and to show between dates similarities and connections that had not previously been perceived. This is called the organizing function. Then another one is the prediction function. If a new model explains something that was not understood earlier, it always implies predictions that can be made. If it is operational, a model implies prediction that can be verified by physical test. This is called prediction. And another one is heuristic function, and the last one is measuring function. And there are also advantage and disadvantage points of models. For example, models allows us to ask questions. Models clarifies complexity. Model leads us to new discovery. It can lead us to have a new discoveries. And there are also limitations or disadvantage point when talking about communication model. The first one is it can lead us to oversimplification. Some, like Durkheim, believes that there is no value in model at all. Model can mislead important point of comparison. And it can also can lead of a confusion of the model between the behavior it portrays. And there is also premature closure. If someone uses model to explain communication. So these are some important points under advantage and disadvantage of model. This is about communication model. I have mentioned different model of communications. Stimulus response model. Everything will be mentioned here. This is one example for the model. This is what we call it, stimulus response model. Here, stimulus, receptor, messenger, effector, response, and objectives, all are mentioned here. If we go every part, mentioned here, yeah, it will take time. Shannon and Weaver mechanical model is mentioned here. Information. There are different elements. Number one is information source, transmitter, channel, and noise source, receiver, destination. These are the model. These are the model, and this is the process. I will not go to all these things. Strength and weakness of Shannon-Weaver mechanical model. Yeah, all these things are mentioned. Here is Kramer's interactive model. A few explanation is also mentioned here. I will not go in very detail. Strength, weakness are mentioned. Berlos SCMR model. Berlos SCMR. Full form of SCMR is sender, channel, message, receiver. So, according to Berlos model, there is source from the sender, message, and channel and receiver. So, to exchange or to send any message or any content of the message, any content to our message, communication skills is important. Attitude, knowledge, social system, and culture all are all these things plays very, very important role. Then yeah, significance and weaknesses are also mentioned here. Then the last one, maybe the second last, Gepner's model is also explained here. So this model is to be read from left to right. Left to right. Since I'm going to give you all this material, you can go through by yourself so that yeah. Advantage point is also mentioned. Then for this section, these are the suggested reading. These are the suggested reading. If you can collect this book, it will be more than enough. Communication, the study of human communication, written by David Mortensen. And another one is Introducing Communication and Media Studies to 10th Students, published by John Joshua Raja and Margaret Kalai-Selvi. And another one is L. Imsutosi Jamir, A Basic Guide to Communication Studies. And the last one is Towards a General Model of Communication, Audio-Visual Communication Review, written by Gapners. So this is all about communication model. We'll be moving to the next section. B is finished. Now, moving to the next section, section C, types of communication. This one is also very, very simple. Different types of communication. Here we have intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication. Sometimes many students, when asking about the difference between intra and interpersonal communication, they mix up these two, and I want you to look carefully about the difference between intra and interpersonal communication. Now, moving to the first one, interpersonal communication can be understood as communication within oneself. Communication within oneself, or talking within individual self, or with the self. This is called interpersonal communication. And there are some interpersonal communication that can be found in Christian life. Personal prayer and meditation is also a part of interpersonal communication. After reading the Bible and meditating upon it, the Word of God is allowed to speak to the individual. Therefore, the Word of God is made to form the stimulus for the interpersonal communication of an individual. Then worship. Yeah, there is also communication element, interpersonal communication element in worship. In our worship, community or congregational prayers are widely used. And these prayers stimulate the thinking, reflection of the people gathered to worship God. And interpersonal communication element is also present in preaching. You can imagine as if someone who's supposed to deliver his message, before he go to the church, before he go to the worship place, being a preacher, he has to prepare by himself. Sometimes we need to take our pen, we need to open the Bible, we need to pray, we need to meditate. So all these things, we need to think. We need to think about what I'm going to deliver today or tomorrow. So these things happen within ourselves. So communication happen or occur within ourselves is known as intrapersonal communication. And another one, next one is interpersonal communication. This communication is defined as a basic human interaction and transaction between two individuals. It is a face-to-face communication, and it is also known as two-way process of communication with immediate feedback and ability to adapt to each other's output. In other words, in the context of human communication, when two persons are involved in communicating with each other, that is known as interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication. And interpersonal communication in biblical narrative, we can see and we can recollect a number of records from the Bible. For example, in the Bible, we find many references to instances of interpersonal communication. In Genesis chapter 3, we have reference to God speaking to the snake, to woman, and to the man. And God spoke to Moses. And in the New Testament, the conversation between Jesus and John the Baptist, conversation between the angel Gabriel and Mary, all these things are a good example for interpersonal communication, because this communication process had been taken place between individuals. Every communication that have been taken place between individuals, between the two persons, is known as interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication. Now, some important qualities that a person needs to possess or to build interpersonal communication. Or we can also rephrase the heading in this way: some important principle, communication principle that a person needs to possess to build interpersonal communication. Number one, respect. Respect. Making other people feel valued and important is very, very important. And another one is honesty, is also another principle that a person needs to follow if he or she wants to build genuine and effective interpersonal communication between individuals. Then empathy, quality of making friends, emotional control, a sense of humor, sensitivity towards others' needs, trust, tolerance, ability to get along with co-workers. All these things are important. Ability to towards others' needs, to get along with co-workers. And lack of ethnocentrism is also another quality that a person needs to have. Openness. And last one is be what you are. Be what you are. So if you can build up, or if you can have all these qualities or communication principle, if you can follow this principle, or if you can practice this principle, you will become successful communicators. Successful communicators. Now, moving to the next one, group communication. Group. This is understood as the communication process in which more than two people are participating and interacting among themselves. Interpersonal communication takes place between individuals, but group communication group communication is communication process in which more than two people are involved. More than two people are participating and interacting among themselves. And it is a form of communication within groups of people and between groups of people. Some examples are given here. This is about group communication. Then community communication. We still have another communication. And this communication may refer to communication process within a community of people or a section of people through which ideas, experience, opinion, information are shared or exchanged. In helping people at all level to communicate and empower them to recognize important issues and find common ground for action and build a sense of identity and participation in order to implement their decision. This is what we call it community communication. Then another one is mass communication. Mass communication, second last. This can be understood as a process in which the masses of the people are engaged. I hope you can see the underline sentence or words. It is a process in which the masses of the people are engaged in production, in distribution, in reception and reflection. This is known as mass communication. And in an ideal situation, mass communication would refer to the mass participation in the communication process, both in terms of sending and receiving. And nevertheless, due to the emerging technology and media, the process of mass communication is organized from the central to the periphery. A few people produce a program for the mass audience. The masses participate merely as audience. They are merely viewers or reader or listener because of a new development that we can see from technology. Now, last one, folk communication. According to Bowman, folk communication refers to any group of people. Folk refer to any group of people who share one common factor. And it also refers to people belonging to a class, farmland, county dwellers, or a great mass of common people that make up a nation. Product is its sophisticated art and continue its tradition. And in its simplest term, folk communication is people's communication. Very simple, huh? Folk communication means people communication. This means the message and meanings are shared or transmitted by people. And the traditional folklore like myths, legend, folktale, all these things are included under this folk communication, which are expressed and presented to the audience without any modern mediated machine. So this can be called as folk communication. We'll be seeing folk communication, alternative communication, and another type of communication. But under different types of communication, these 6 points are what we can see according to our syllabus. So these are some of the important points. Here I have mentioned advantage of folk communication. For example, according to Keval Jayakumar, the folk media are close to the heart and minds of the people. The reason why I mentioned about the advantage of folk communication is many question setters used to set their question from this section. Minds of the people, so they appeal is at a personal intimate level. Then second point is, since people place high value on the folk media, their credibility as message to channel increase and establish direct rapport with the masses. Then let me skip some point. Folk media are also available to all at a very low cost and enjoyed by person of different age group. And folk media are usually participatory, community-oriented, and cheap in characteristics. It can also be used for bringing about change in the society. For this section, these are suggested reading. If you would like to collect another book from where you can get these things, directive for its use for today. You can see a basic guide to communication. Communication Studies by L. Imtosotti, Imsutoshi, Imsutoshi. And another one, Theories of Different Types, Levels of Communication. May I also suggest another book, Introduction to Communication and Media Studies for Theological Students, written by John Joshua Raja and Samson Prabhakar. You may not be able to get this book because that book is, you may not see the latest edition of this book, but a revised one will be available. Revised one, revised by Margaret Kalai-Selby. Margaret Kalai-Selby. She will be having this book. Now, moving to the next point. The type of communication we have finished. Now, we have barrier to communication. Barrier to communication. The first part is about few explanation about barrier to communication. But before that, a few things that I would like to share with you is that communication is complete and perfect when the receiver understands the message in the same sense and spirit as the communicator intends to convey. The idea is that idea and information reach to and responded by receiver remain unaltered and distorted. Unaltered and distorted. But practically, it has been noticed that such perfect and complete communication does not take place anytime. We want to build a perfect or effective or genuine communication all the time, but it cannot happen all the time because of certain reason, because of certain obstacle or other factors. As the process of communication involves sender, channel, receiver. So the problem of communication usually lies with either one or more of these things, sender, receiver, channel. Therefore, any attempt, now moving to the explanation, you can see from the screen, any attempt, any impediment or any hindrance, any interference restricting the free flow of communication is called barrier to communication. In another word, barrier are any obstacle or difficulties that comes in the way of communication. They may be physical, mechanical, psychological, cultural, or linguistic in nature. So these are what we call it barrier to communication. We have different types of barrier. Number one is mechanical barrier. So mechanical barriers can be counted as a breakdown of any equipment that is involved within communication. Breakdown of any equipment. The defective equipment that impede the smooth flow of message, like sudden crash down of the computer while chatting with friends in the internet, the failure of electricity while watching an important program on the television, and all such kind of distortion are counted as mechanical barriers. And besides, mechanical barriers are those raised by the channels employed by the employed for interpersonal, group, or mass communication. And channel can also become barrier when the message is interfered with by some disturbance, which increase the difficulty in a reception or prevented some element of the message reaching its destination or both. And the absence of communication facilities too would be a mechanical barrier. Technically, such a barrier are clubbed together under one general term. There is channel noise. This is what we call it mechanical barrier. Now, moving to the next one, physical barrier. This barrier can occur when the teacher, preacher, or any other public speaker uses an excessive body language or an incorrect posture or gesture that fails to deliver the message to the audience. This is called physical barrier. Then another one is linguistic barrier. In the study of communication, problems or disturbance caused by language are called linguistic or semantic barrier. And linguistic barrier are present. They are present both in oral as well as written communication. So this can be presented both in oral as well as written communication. This is what we call it linguistic barrier. There can be so many things to discuss under this point. Now, psychological barrier. Communication may be filtered or blocked by attitude, by belief and values. Attitude are particularly views of people and situation and events. So these are generally cause interpersonal communication. If our message is not clear or what we are saying. Also, if we do not listen properly to what the other person says, then we are making assumption. In order to avoid this barrier, we must perceive ourselves and others in a proper light. Psychological barriers are categorized. However, categorized in the way which affect the communication psychologically. And in another word, the psychological barrier affect the communication in two ways. Number one is emotionally, and second one is perceptually and selectively. And these barriers are often caused by prejudice, attitude, and what is the last point? I cannot see from here. Personality. So psychological barriers are often caused by this three. Then last one, environmental barriers. So these barriers are any part of the environment or surroundings that can prevent communication or getting in touch with other person or something else. And there are a huge number of environmental barriers to communication. For example, time, place, space, climate, and noise. Time lapse and the amount of time it takes for a message to travel across the world is one of the most major barriers to communication and how things are communicated. Communication and the speed of communication is the most major factor. And place. is also another factors that can bring about environmental barrier. The space in between the communication and the size of the area is also another major factors in the process of communication. That means space can act as a barrier and an aid to communication. So climate, noise, all these things plays very, very important. So there are these are the generally accepted barriers to communication, and these factors are powerful enough to block or to alter the communication of the message completely. Then uh, when we talk about communication barrier, another section we should not overlook is that solution. For the solution of communication barrier, or for overcoming barrier to communication, there are certain um, points which are believed to be helpful in solving this kind of problem. For example, taking the receiver more seriously, we can solve many problems. And crystal clear message or systematically arranged message can solve many communication problems. Delivering message skillfully can also solve many problems. Focusing on the receiver is also the way how we can solve many communication problems. Using multiple channels to communicate instead of relying on one channel, and ensuring appropriate feedback, and be aware of your own state of mind, emotion, or attitude. We must be aware of our own state of mind, our emotion, our attitude. And proper encoding and decoding of the message can also solve many problems. Understanding the situation, selection of medium, maintenance of instrument, open mind, and positive attitude, develop a good listening skill, eliminate fear. All these things can become good factors that can solve communication problem. And in addition to this point mentioned here, I have another suggestion for solving communication barrier. For example, have a positive attitude about communication. Try to have a very positive attitude about communication. Defensive interfere with communication. This can also solve many problems, many communication problems. And another one we can think about is include communication as a skill to be evaluated. And yeah, there can be a number of suggestions for solution for overcoming communication problem. I think you can also suggest some important helpful suggestion for overcoming barrier to communication, apart from what have been mentioned here. So this is all about communication, barrier to communication. Then it is already 7:10. We still have many more. How shall we do? Now, moving to the next point, next section. Issue in communication. We'll have a few discussion here. We'll have a few discussion here. At the end, I'll suggest some helpful book for your reading. Here, under issue in communication, the first section is history of mass media, beginning from cave painting, age of orality, invention of writing, script, printing, telegraph, and electronic media. I have mentioned some important points, beginning with the explanation about mass media. Mass media is information that reach large numbers or groups of people in a short time. This is called mass media. And in a very shortest way, mass media is a one-to-many communication flow. This is what we call it, mass media. And this can be written, spoken, broadcast communication. And the information transmitted could be entertainment, news, advertising, or public service announcement, all these things. So beginning from cave painting, we can see a brief history of the development of mass media. I'll not go in detail. Age of orality, oral tradition in tribal society, invention of writing and scripts, then printing, then telegraph, electronic media. So for section A and section B, under this topic, especially for section B, the book mentioned below is suggested for all of us. Introduction to Communication and Media Studies, a textbook for theological students, written by or published by John Joshua Raja and Samson Prabhakar. So this is the all published book published by John Joshua Raja and Samson Prabhakar. If this one is not available, if you cannot get this book, for alternative, the cover, the book cover mentioned here is the edited, revised book of this one. Introducing Communication and Media Studies to Theological Students, edited by John Joshua Raja and Margaret Kalaisel. So I suggest you to have at least this book. If you have this book, and if you don't have any other book for your exam preparation, there is nothing to worry. If you read and have this book, if you have this book and read this book, surely you will get more than 70, more than 80. This book is the best. So this is all about this section. Then moving to the next section. Functions of media. Here we have social media, traditional media, and alternative media. We'll go one by one. We'll see one by one. Social media. Few explanation is mentioned here. No need to go through about all these things. Social media is a computer-based technology. Computer-based technology. Then that facilitate the sharing of idea, thought, and information through the building of virtual networks and communities. And many scholars have suggested different function or role played by mass media. The first one is information. At the beginning, we have mentioned about the key basic functions of communication. Here, I added the three basic function: information, entertainment, education. So one of the most important role played by mass media is to inform. Television, radio, newspaper, periodical, film, and the internet are some of the vehicles providing information to society today. Traditionally, these sources provide uh, information about important events such as war, weather incident, election, financial news, and many more. Then another one is entertainment. Uh, Another important role played by mass media or social media is entertainment. It is also viewed as the most obvious function of media. Most obvious function of media. We know about entertainment. It is a kind of performance that provides pleasure to the people, to the audience. And education. The next one is education. That means media provide education and information side by side. It provides education in different subjects to people of all levels. It provides different subjects, and they try to educate people directly or indirectly using different forms of content. Then another one is persuasion. Persuasion. Since media has a power to persuade, this is another role played by social media. It helps in reaching for decision on public policy so that it is helpful to govern the people. Though it is possible that one can resort to persuasion for a bad motive. The receiver must be careful about the source of persuasion. Then another one is discussion, promotion, integration. Integration. These are the role played by mass media today. Then another one. Next one is traditional media. Few explanation is given here. So the non-electronic medium, which is a part of our culture and is used for transmitting tradition from one generation to another generation, is called traditional media. And tradition is handing down of belief, experiences, and custom from generation to generation, especially in oral form or by a process of traditional performance and communication. And traditional media, that is the traditional means of communication and expression, exists before the advent of modern mass media. It is already there. Traditional form of media are already there before the advent of modern mass media. Traditional media may include folk theater, street theater, puppet, all these things mentioned here. Folk dance, storytelling, folk music, songs, painting, traditional motif, design and symbols, proverbs, sound, signal, all these things are included. All these things are included. Then functions of traditional media. This section is a little more important. Traditional media passes the cultural value of one generation to another in the society, and through it, the younger generation can learn about their culture. It is very, very important. And this form of media is very popular among the masses, regardless of their education standard, social status, or financial position. It therefore has the advantage of familiarity, personal contact, common language, audience participation, uh, repeatability, and acceptance. Yeah. By mentioning the function of traditional media, we are mentioning the advantage points of this media. Advantage point of this media. Traditional folk media draw upon people's past, present, and future, providing them with glimpse of reality. It inspires the people to perceive the message or information more effectively. And it is a personal form of communication and entertainment, which is, which is a way of life of a community, which is a way of life of community. And on the other hand, traditional media is also understood as any forms of media that focuses on the advertisement and delivering news to the general public or a targeted group of the public. It also refers to any forms of mass communication available before the advent of digital media. So this includes television, radio, newspaper, books, and magazine. So I hope that we can understand about traditional media. Then moving to the alternative media. What is alternative media? John Joshua Raja has given a good explanation about alternative media with appropriate illustration. Alternative media, which is also known as radical media, citizen media, people's media, or community media, is the media that plays an alternative role in a community. So the role played by alternative media is it plays an alternative role in a community, often as alternative to the mass media, as means for social change, as agent of harmony and peace, as voice of the voiceless, as a liberating agent, and as a counter participatory and democratic method. So this media may include almost everything that plays an alternative role in a community, often as alternative to the mass media, as already mentioned here. For example, poster, picture, chart, banner, letter, books, article, journal, magazine, internet, email, website, community radio, cable, local channel, street theater, drama, songs, hymns, music, puppet, telephone, so many things, newspaper, track, video cassette, computer, even PowerPoint presentation, because all these things can come under alternative media, because alternative media plays an alternative role in a community, often as alternative to the mass media, This is the reason why we call it alternative media. Then, what are the functions of alternative media? Number one, it promotes a culture of peace and harmony. It provides dialogical, democratic communitarian, local, and participation. It has become voice of the voiceless, minorities, and others. It can become voice of the voiceless. It strives towards social change, human dignity, and development. It serves as cheap, easy access, non-profit, simple, non-professional, but not all, but some alternative. It provides space for disabled, for example, HIV/AIDS infected, refugees, less privileged people. And it promotes cultural value and heritage. So these are the function and positive points or advantage points of alternative media. So this is suggested book, Introduction to Communication and Media Studies, the same book that I have already mentioned. And another book is Media in Church and Mission, Vigor Sagat, Media in Church and Mission. So this is about functions of media. Next section will be more interesting. What happened? What happened? Yeah, this is going to be PDF. I will not read all the section. The first section is biblical foundation. Here I have mentioned introductory part. And since I'm going to give you this paper written by me, I think it will be a great help for you, for your preparation. At least let me read introductory part. World Association for Christian Communication, that is WSCC document state, Christ on communication was an act of self-giving. And it further defines by stating, he ministered to all but took up the cause of the materially poor and mentally ill and the outcasts of the society, the powerless and the oppressed. So in the same way, Christian communication should be an act of love which liberates all who take part in it. And furthermore, by accepting Christ's sovereignty, the Christian communicators proclaim God's kingdom. Here I have mentioned principle, because our topic is Christian communication, practice and principle. Later I will be repeating about this one. What is principle? What is Christian principle of communication? As we all know, principles are generally and fundamental truth, that may be used in deciding conduct or choice. General principles of communication is therefore a fundamental truth or norms or values that represent what is desirable and positive for a person, group, organization, or community, and help it in determining the rightfulness or wrongfulness of its action. And why it is necessary to have this kind of principle in communication. Why do we need communication principle? Number one, understanding this principle of communication is vital to the functioning of both individuals and the society as a whole for many. Number two, this principle must guide every Christian communication in their works, in their thinking, in their action, to bring about genuine and effective communication for the betterment of individual, for the betterment of community, as well as for the betterment of the society as a whole. And third one, we should use this principle as functional sources of basis. Functional sources of basis, for we all involve, we all participate and do lots of activities in this media environment. Now, moving to the first one, God as the communicating God. Vigor Sagat says, God is by nature a communicator. He is the creator of all things in heaven and on earth. He takes the initiative to communicate his people as well as with his creature. In the Trinitarian perspective, God is also seen as God who communicates in himself. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are communicating to one another in their inner Trinitarian movement. So in this Trinitarian communication, the dialogue between the person is ongoing. And moreover, from the time of the creation of the world, God has been communicated himself to humanity. He expressed himself in different ways. He spoke, so things happened. He sought company with Adam, Abraham, Moses, David, and many more. And moreover, he let his son live in a social context, and he also led his people into a warm community of believers. Therefore, communication is deeply rooted in God's nature. And it is this nature he imparted to humanity when he created us in his own image. Therefore, by looking at the way in which he communicates, we can learn significant lesson about Christian communication. To be successful communicators as well as to be successful in the ministry of communicating the gospel to others, one has to learn the principle and the thought effectively used by God himself. This section is very, very important. It is about communication theology. It is about communication theology. And different media of God's communication are mentioned here. I have mentioned vision and dreams. So many methods, let me say in this way, different communication method employed by God. Vision and dreams is one of the communication method employed by God or used by God. And angels, prophets, no need to explain, no need to explain, otherwise it will take time. Jesus Christ, sign and symbol. And lastly, it has also been recorded as God used written communication. In Exodus 32, here, the verse mentioned here is, it should be 15 to 16. The great commandment on clay. And God also make use of tabernacles, judges, kings, and many more. Now, another one, creation as God's communication. If you are asked to write a short note on creation as God's communication, you can simply refer this section. Bible is an account of God's communication to humankind through creation. From the creation of the world, God has been communicating himself to humanity. Creation is one of the vehicles through which God speaks. And the Bible is the record of that communication. The psalmist said, the heavens declare the glory of God, their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. Paul also reinforces the same thought in Romans. He said, for since the creation of the world, God's visible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. This means that God communicates not only within himself, but also in and through his creation. And the following example of biblical wisdom and Christian tradition would indicate that God has used his creation to communicate with people throughout the ages. In the Old Testament, David had an awareness of his place in the universe after reflecting on creation. We have already mentioned this one. And besides, we are told in chapter 38 and 39 of Job that God answered Job's question out of the storm. And Jesus often used natural metaphor to communicate a message to his listener. And this ranges from the provision made for births in terms of food and clothing, written or mentioned in Matthew 6:26, reflection on seeds germinating in different soil types, and the miracles of seeds growing of maturity, to Jesus comparing himself to a grape vine. These are the records we can see from the New Testament. Now, Revelation, 2 important events. Here, I have mentioned Revelation 2 nature. Revelation 2 nature, Revelation 2 important event. For example, Exodus event. Exodus event. By revealing himself, God communicates himself to his people, to his creation. God is the one who took initiative in liberating his people. And revelation in dreams. I have mentioned this one. And Jacob dreams, Joseph dreams, Pharaoh's, all these things are mentioned. Samuel, Nathan, Solomon, Daniel. You can go through all these things. I will not go all this section. Prophet and kings as God's medium of communication. And maybe this may be the last, not the last section. If I go to all this section, it will take time. Let me skip this section also. Prophets and kings as God's medium of communication. Throughout history, the spirit of prophecy has used three methods of delivering God's messages. Number one is oral, second one is written, and another one is dramatized. Dramatized. All are mentioned, no need to read through. And another one is parabolic action of the prophet, is mentioned here. An example of the parable from the Old Testament are the eagle and the vine. She is making a king. Wasted her vineyard, Samson, stone, bringing forth sweetness, all these things. And prophet oracle are also mentioned here. Now, incarnation. Another section is incarnation as God's communication. At the beginning, we have mentioned saying that communication is not only sending and receiving the message. It is, in fact, communication is everything. Communication is everything. Without communication, there is no way of survival for human. There can be no salvation. There can be no Christian doctrine. There can be no theology without communication. Everything is communication. So incarnation is also to be regarded as God's communication. From the creation of the world, God has been revealing himself to humanity in various ways. In the New Testament, God reveals himself fully through his Son. In him, God is present and incarnated. God's incarnation through his Son, Jesus Christ, is at the center of any Christian communication. John 1:14, the Word becomes flesh, a human being, fully of grace and truth, lived among us. We saw his grace, the glory which he received as the Father's only Son. We have only 20 minutes, but we still have another. Let me skip this section also, since I'm going to give you this material. Jesus and communication. This section is also important. Features of Jesus' communication are mentioned here. 10 features of Jesus' communication. For example, Jesus is empowered by the Spirit. Number one. Second one, he used almost everyday objects like bread, water, light, seed, salt, vineyard, vine, all these things. And Jesus communicated in speech and in miracles. And his communication relates to a wide range of people, and Jesus' style of communication was not unidirectional but an interactive and dialogical process. And Jesus' approach varied according to his audience. And Jesus was frank and unequivocal. He was frank. And Jesus' communication was characterized by authority. And Jesus' communication was characterized by the truth. Jesus' communication was often enigmatic, ambiguous, and probing. But death and resurrection of Jesus as communication. See, everything is communication. Even Jesus' birth, even Jesus' death and resurrection is also can be seen from communication perspective as a communication, So this is all about these things. After his death, his resurrection, resurrected body constantly engaged in communication. Jesus' method of teaching and preaching. Here, this section is a little more important. Method employed by Jesus. Number one, parable. I have mentioned under this footnote. Meaning of parable. No need to explain. And another one is overstatement. Then another one is hyperbole and metaphor, proverbs, riddles and paradox, irony, question, poetry. Jesus as a speaker and listener. He has speaker credibility. May not, this section, I do not know whether it will be important or not. All right, this is the last section. Last section, let me read to at least the last section. After subheading is apostle and their method of communication, verbal and written. Even apostle also employ a number of communication methods. For example, they employed written method. The practice of written method seems to have been popular during the period of apostle. Acts attribute a practice to Paul and other leaders of the early Jewish Christian community in Jerusalem. And next one, Pauline letters themselves are the main testimony of Paul's attempt to maintain contact with Christian communities over more or less large distance by means of written communication. Judas and Silas were supposed to add their oral commentary to the information. So they are also employed oral communication. Intensive traveling and personal visit is also another method employed by apostle, teaching and instruction orally, debate format, dialogue, prayer fellowship, miracles and healing. All these things are communication method that we can recollect from the story of the apostle. Now, moving to the next section, which is more interesting than the previous one. Yes, Christian principle of communication. This one is very, very important. Here I have mentioned definition and principle of communication, background of Christian principle of communication, a brief history of WSCC. Without knowing the background of or a brief history of WCC, we cannot explain about Christian principles of communication. So I have mentioned all these things. Oh, someone is calling. Let me not. Please excuse for a moment. Zaira. Okay. Definition of principle. I have already mentioned. Why do we need this principle? As we all engage in media-saturated environment, this principle will guide every Christian, every Christian communicators in our works, in all our works, in our thinking activities, to help them become effective communicators and to set an exemplary light for others to bring about a healthy communication environment. And another one, background of Christian principle of communication. This is the background. Background. Christian principle of communication originate from the World Association for Christian Communication, that is WSCC, which is an international NGO registered as a charity in both Canada and United Kingdom. It is a worldwide network of ecumenical Christian communicators whose global office is based in Toronto. And it is a membership organization bringing together some 1,500 institutions and individuals in more than 100 counties. So this is about the background of WSCC. And I have mentioned brief history of WSCC. If I go through, at least, let me try to adjust myself. So the origin of WSCC date back to 1950, when Christian communicators from Europe and North America began seeking guidelines for the future of religious broadcasting. Several organizations, including the WCC, share the same concern, and they eventually joined forces to establish the old WSCC in 1968. And rapid development in mass media worldwide and concern to integrate the work of the Agency for Christian Literature, development of the World Council of Churches led to a merger of the two NGO in 1975 that created the present WSCC. Therefore, in 1986, WSCC adopted its Christian principles of communication as a statement of core values based on liberation theology's option for the poor. So this is what we call it Christian principles of communication. It is being adopted by WSCC. Now, communication creates community. WSCC builds on the assumption that genuine or effective communication cannot take place where there is division, where there is alienation, where there is isolation and barriers that disturb or prevent or distort social interaction. Just as the document states that one aim of our works is the breakdowns of all kinds of barriers which prevent and develop the development of communities with right and justice for all, every Christian communicator is directed to work for building up community. So communication should create community. This is the focus. The focus. Every communication, especially for Christian communicators, should create community, should work for the betterment of the community. This is the main focus. It further states, true communication is facilitated when people join together regardless of race, color, religion, conviction, and where there is acceptance of and commitment to one another. The statement therefore indicates that the concern for community occupies a central place in the WSCC. In Jesus' ministry, one can also see this concern for community. For example, the calling of the disciples, the innumerable feast which Jesus partook, the institution of the Lord's Supper, and the resurrection appearance which affirm Jesus' desire to enable community. Since the word communication and we need to expand a little more this one. And community comes from the same root word, communis, which means to share. Any true communication should enable building and sustaining community. Then second principle is communication is participatory. According to WSCC document, sometimes I spell out the term document, sometimes principle. All are the same term. All are the same term. According to WCC document, communication is participatory. Communication is participatory. One of the most important serious concern of the WSCC is Christian communication is participatory. It refers to the full involvement of participant in communication process and includes giving individual access to communication channel and enabling them to participate freely and equally in any Christian communication. Since participatory communication shares meaning and establish and maintain social relationship, every Christian communicator is anticipated to maintain this principle in their communication process. Then another one is communication liberates. That means the main focus is being a responsible Christian communicators. Our communication must liberate. We must liberate others. We must work for liberation. Though the WCC state its focus on liberation from the power and hegemony of modern mass media, the focus can also be integrated with the church mission in general. The document clearly saw where the WCC stand with regards to liberative dimension of communication. It states, communication which liberates, which enables people to articulate their own needs and helps them to act together to meet those needs. It enhances their sense of dignity and underline their right to full participation in the life of society. It aims to bring about structure in society which are more just, more egalitarian, and more conducive to the fulfillment of human rights. And it further states, genuine communication presupposes the recognition that all human beings are equal worth. The more explicit equality becomes in human interaction, the more easily communication occurs. Then, we have mentioned about these things. Last para, in line with this statement or liberative dimensions of God's communication, the WCC appeals to all Christian communicators to persuade their communication for liberative purpose. This is the main focus. This is the main focus. Now, communication support and develop culture. The way how we participate, the way how we engage ourselves. We must support and develop our own culture. This is the main focus. This is the main focus. No need to discuss. Moving to the next one. Communication is prophetic. Prophets are regarded as ones who bridge the gap between God and human or the world. Through the medium of the prophet, God communicates with human. In a similar way, the WSCC appeals to all Christians to be prophetic in their communication process in the context of oppression, in the context of discrimination and marginalization. The prophetic vocation is to be exercised within the context of the conflict between power and powerless. It is the responsibility of the church or Christian communicators to exercise the role of prophetic communication, combining the memory of freedom in Christ and the vision of God's community. The document, that is WSCC document, states, prophetic communication expresses itself in words and deeds. Such prophetic action must be willing to challenge the principalities and powers and may carry a high price. And furthermore, since lies and half-truths are a great threat to communication, the document further appeals to all Christian communicators to serve truth and challenge falsehood and help people to distinguish truth from falsehood. So our communication must be prophetic to liberate or to help or to bring about a genuine and effective communication within the community or within the church. So these are the suggested reading. If you would like to read the original document of WSCC, you can browse. You can browse it. It will be available in the internet. You just type WSCC, it will appear, and you can get the little more background of WSCC also. So this is all about Christian principles of communication. This section is also to be regarded as communication theology. Communication theology. Now, moving to the next section, we have only 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah, this is going to be the last section. We'll have a quick look only. So we'll stop. Importance of communication in Christian ministry. Communication in worship and preaching. I have mentioned some communication elements involved in worship and preaching. I have mentioned about worship as communication, communication involved in worship, then communication, some explanation about preaching, element of preaching, function, role played by preaching, all these things are mentioned. And different kind of preaching, I have mentioned, classification of sermon, may not be important for this section, may not, all this section may not be important for your exam, but and step involved in preaching. Level of communication involved in preaching. Interpersonal, almost all types of communication are involved in preaching. Interpersonal communication is involved. Interpersonal communication can also be involved. Group communication, mass communication, new media communication. All these types of communication can be involved in preaching. That is the reason why we called preaching as communication. Then section 1 is next section is communication in counseling, speaking, silence, and listening. All details are mentioned here. All details. Speaking, listening, kinds of listening, importance of listening. To be effective listener, what we can do. The 3 basic listening model. Then silence. Silence is also part of communication. Then benefits that we can get from silence communication. Silence, the power. One thing that I would like to mention from this point is that being a Christian communicators, we must try to make use of the power of silence. Whenever necessary, the power of silence. This is very, very powerful communication. Then home visit, family programs as communication. All these things are also to be considered as communication. Then important event like birthday, baptism, confirmation, ordination, sickness and funeral, bereavement, and the importance of communication in this situation are also mentioned. Here, another important section, communication in pluralistic context. Yeah, if I spend little more minutes, please understand me, because I want to go to at least this section. Communication in pluralistic context. One may define pluralistic context as the presence of several different religions, different beliefs, different doctrines, culture, tradition, languages, ethnic background, race, caste, etc. in the society. This is what we call it pluralistic context. However, one of the basic facts to be taken into consideration in today's society is multi-religious and multicultural existence. And this context or plurality has produced a diversity of communities with separate and distinctive identities. So in this situation, each community has their own creed, has their own cult, has their own practice, pattern of conduct, culture. And moreover, each community also has developed its own social political interests. So as a result, we can see the presence of several awful, bad things happen, dreadful things, not only in the society, but within particular community as well as among individuals, such as communal class, hatred, violence, conflict, rivals, misunderstanding, isolation. Why all these things happen? Because of this plurality. Because we all have our own way of life. Because we all have our own beliefs. We all have our own practices. So this has a number of consequences: violence, hatred, misunderstanding, isolation, which exclude others, and additionally, which can become a hindrance and barrier to communication. So it creates not only communication gap, but also hampers or impedes the process of communication, even the development process, even the growth in the society as a whole. Therefore, in order to overcome the problem and difficulties that have been involved in the society because of this plurality, effective and genuine communication is essentially necessary. Essentially necessary. Therefore, in order to build and establish effective communication in the context of plurality or plural society, the following suggestion may be helpful. These suggestions that I've mentioned on the screen are a simple collection from the book written by John Joshua Raja. John Joshua Raja established interreligious denominational cooperation. By establishing interreligious denominational cooperation, we can overcome certain problems. Providing and developing interreligious dialogue, we can overcome or we can solve certain problems. Building a community of harmony, playing prophetic and liberative role through empowerment, networking, providing alternative media for harmony and reconciliation. We can solve many problems. Then other guidelines for communication in pluralistic context. Understand your own culture and communication variables. Learn the communication rules for the other culture. Approach intercultural communication with a positive attitude. Avoid ethnocentrism. Be flexible and show respect for cultural diversity and use communication constructively. Where barriers exist, make efforts to communicate in the most effective way possible. So this is all about the last section. So with this, I will stop my sharing. Thank you so much for giving me this wonderful time and wonderful moment through which I can engage myself